This is the Almost Awakened podcast, a no-nonsense approach to spirituality with your hosts, Brittany Hartley and Bill Reel. Here we dive deep into the wisdom traditions while acknowledging insightful breakthroughs in science, psychology, and human development. Our goal is to explore the good life and the very best of spirituality. No nonsense required. Check us out at almostawaken.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources we shared. And now, today's podcast episode.
Hey, Britt Hartley, how are you?
I'm good. How
Excellent.
are you?
Really good. Doing quite well. It's been a crazy week. Somebody in one of our other podcasts threw out the belief that our founder of our past religion never was the originator of polygamy. And so I felt like the gauntlet got thrown down. And so I said, this coming Wednesday, that'll be our topic. We will prove that he was. And I've spent probably 50 hours so far putting this together. But you can see I haven't shaved in a couple of days. I barely made it for this show at the last minute.
That's like someone calling out your Enneagram 8 and saying, are you really an Enneagram 8?
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to show you. Yep, that's it.
Well, I had our family dog pass away yesterday. So this week it's been,
I'm so sorry.
I hear my kids in the background, but
yeah,
this week I've used it as an opportunity to talk about death with my kids. So if you're hearing my kids in the background, please don't turn off the podcast if you're listening to this later. I'm going to be kind of just lurking in this podcast. But I just wanted to pop in and say hello. But because I got a lot of noisy kids at home, I'll be kind of muted for most of this episode. But I did just want to hop on and introduce this guest that I'm super excited about. I found him on TikTok, and his name is Tori, who's been a member of AA for 37 years. And we kind of found each other on TikTok and started talking. And he was talking about the intersection of AA and spirituality and atheism and secular religion. And I just thought it would be a super fun discussion to dive into. And then I'll just kind of be lurking, and Bill, I'll let you kind of lead this discussion. But should be really interesting dive into, an intersection that we haven't talked about really before.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll bring on Tori now. And Tori, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. Give us maybe just a brief bio of yourself. I know Britt made the note that you've been a member of AA for 37 years. Maybe talk for a moment about what AA is and any other things you would want people to know about you as we kind of kick the conversation off.
Okay. Well, first of all, we'll just use my first name. That's something we do in AA for several reasons, but we'll keep to that. And I just right up front, I don't speak for AA. I'm going to speak of my own experience, my own thoughts, my own observations, having been a member for 37 years. I can give you maybe 10 minutes on my story. Is that good?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I think it will help lead the conversation, and I'll try to stick to my spiritual path as much as possible as I tell it, and not get too into the gory details. But yeah, I grew up in a non-religious household, so we never talked about God. My father had gone to church as a child, and I asked him about it. He said, "Oh, well, as soon as I didn't have to go, I never went back," and I just thought it was kind of stupid. He didn't have any time for religion. So I grew up in that. When I was about 15, I started getting into drugs and alcohol. Loved it. It made it easy. It relaxed me. I was very insecure at that point, and it helped me be with people and feel at ease and talk to girls and have fun, and I could be the life of the party, where without it I felt like not much, and that I think, I've heard it said, and I think it's true for me, that it was an innocent attempt to manage my anxiety. I never set out to have a drug or alcohol problem. I was just like, oh, this works, I'll do this, and then I sort of developed an identity around it a bit, and I kept going. I think I was fully qualified to be a member of AA by the time I was 18. I was already getting in a lot of trouble with drinking. Um, I had a couple of car wrecks, one of which I really probably should have died in. I'm very fortunate I didn't kill anybody else or myself while I was out driving around. I ended up in jail a couple of times. I got thrown out of I had a lot of advantages growing up. I had good, loving parents, pretty well off, sent me to good schools, and gave me a lot of advantages, most of which I squandered. I went to a good boarding school and I got thrown out of that, and then I went to a good college and I got thrown out of that. And by the time I was 22, I became physically addicted to alcohol, so I'd wake up in the morning shaking and need to start. And I became a morning drinker. I started drinking in the morning on the way to work, and I went over a period in college before I got thrown out where I fell into a very dark period of something you all talk about on this podcast, which was a nihilistic, just a real sense that there was no meaning or purpose to life, and I was just lost in a very dark spot. And I was reading. Have you all ever read the book Man's Search for Meaning? It's just a terrific.
Is that Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that, I was in the back of it. He talks about his therapy, which is, helping find meaning and purpose. That he thinks that's what people need more than anything else, is a sense of meaning and purpose. And he says in there that of the alcoholics that he and others had worked with, he thought about 90% of them had a sense of meaningless. And drug addicts, he said 100% of the ones he worked with had a sense that there was no meaning or purpose to life. And so I think that's a common thread amongst alcoholics. Anyway, by the time I was 24, I all the fun was out of it. I mean, I drank in the beginning. I drank to be with people, to be social, to feel part of things, to be part of the gang, to feel connected. And by the end, I was alone. I just wanted to be alone, and so I was in my apartment with the shades drawn, afraid to answer the door, afraid to answer the phone. I just run out and get something to drink and come back and drink it by myself, and that's where it ended up for me. And after one particularly embarrassing episode, I woke up shaking terribly. I ran down to the corner and got a couple 6-packs of beer, came back and drank them both. It was still just 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was still shaking. I said, God, what is wrong with me? And a voice came from within me, said, call AA. I was like, AA? I don't even know what AA is. I'm pretty sure it's a group of religious nuts of some kind, but I called AA. And it turned out there was an AA clubhouse just a couple of blocks from where I was living. I lived in Philadelphia at the time. So I ran over there. I stumbled over there, and this guy helped me. He spent like 3 hours with me. He didn't know me. He spent 3 hours helping me. I don't even know his name. I always like to thank him when I tell my story. Anyway, he took me to a detox, and where I suffered through this withdrawal. And finally, after sleeping for quite some time, I woke up and I felt much better. And they handed me the big book of AA. That's a book that we have that we call the big book. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. I think I emailed you a PDF version of it. And I got to the word God and I was like, I'm not doing that, But I left there knowing I was an alcoholic. Like I knew 100% that I was alcoholic who should never drink. And there's the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is admitting you're powerless over alcohol. And what that means is there's 2 parts to powerlessness. One is once I start drinking, I have a very difficult time controlling the amount that I drink. The second part is over time, even when I really want to stop drinking, or the alcoholic wants to, over time, our mind convinces us it's okay to drink. It'll tell us a lie and we'll believe it. We won't reason ourselves out of a drink, we'll reason ourselves into a drink. And so our minds are very unreliable on our own. And that's exactly, so I went to this detox, I got out, I really didn't want to drink. I stayed sober for a month. Everything got better. I looked better. I smelled better. I had money in my pocket. Girls were interested in me again. Everything was looking up, and my mind was going the other way. And after a month, I said, well, I'm probably making too big deal of this. I could probably have three and just have that be my limit, which is a totally insane thought for me. That never happened. And I did that. I sat down and I had 3, and then I like held on for dear life. And then the next day I was back to the races, worse than ever. I drank for another 7 months, during which I could have easily died. All this time I'd been told to go to AA. But I didn't think it was for me because it was a God thing. I had a vision of it being religious people that I didn't want to be associated with. Anyway, I eventually went to this rehab, and I had my last drink on February 28th, 1986, on the way to that rehab. And I've been sober ever since. So I'm super grateful for that. No drugs, no alcohol for 37 years. And no self-prescribed drugs anyway. And so I went on, and I was given 2 gifts right then. One was I knew I was an alcoholic. Like, I didn't have any doubt about that. And not everybody who comes in is sure of that. But I was sure. And I also knew, like, there's nothing left for me there. Like, I'm done, man. All the fun is out of it. All the joy of it is gone. All the feeling of connection, and it's just done. I'm not going to get that. I'm not going to find that again. It's finished for me. And then the second thing was, when I was in this rehab, they actually made us go to AA meetings, outside meetings. So they piled us all in a van and drove us down and dropped us off. And I went in about halfway through the first meeting I went to. I said, I love these people. It was funny. Like, everybody was laughing at stuff I thought was funny too. And that's nice. There were nice looking people there. There were young people my age getting sober. And I just left that meeting with a feeling like, I could do this, and I like those people. I could come back to this. And so I went back, and when I got out, I went to tons of meetings. I went all the time, and fell in with a pack of young people who were getting sober at the same time. And this is in Philadelphia. We would roam around the city all together, and go to meetings and laugh, and go out to dinner, and I had as much fun then as I'd ever had drinking. So I'm very grateful for all of them. I was still very much an atheist, wanted nothing to do with God. And that's something I wanted to make clear, is that nobody made me believe anything. If they had told me you have to believe X, Y, or Z, I would have left immediately. When they set up the program, they understood people like me. Apparently, it's a common characteristic amongst alcoholics, is a sort of childish defiance. Like, if you tell me to do it, that's the one thing I'm not going to do. No matter how good it would be for me, I'm just not going to want to do it, And anyway, I went on, and I admit, when I look back, I realized ever since I was a teenager, I had a feeling of sort of emptiness right here. I'm touching my solar plexus area, like something was missing there, and which I now know is sort of a spiritual thirst, but I didn't know what it was. It felt like a thirst for alcohol initially, but when I stopped drinking, it didn't go away, And so my first thought was, well, clearly I need a girlfriend, So I chased women around for a while, and then I got married, and I was like, oh, that wasn't it, And then I went on, and I was like, oh, it must be because I never finished my education. So I went back to college, and I actually went all the way through and got a PhD. I have a PhD in geology, and I remember on the day I got the diploma, I was like, oh, that wasn't it. And then I went on, and I found myself at over 20 years sober, with a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, living in a beautiful house in the country, with a cool job, making good money, all the things I would have thought would have made me happy. and it seemed like the more I got, the emptier I felt, like something was really missing in my life. And I hit an emotional bottom. And I was still very much an atheist at this point. In fact, I'd gotten deeply into Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and those guys, which help me feel sort of intellectually superior to people. But it really isolated me from the group too, because a lot of people in AA were talking about God. I was just like, what are these people talking about? I just felt so alone sometimes. So anyway, I hit this emotional bottom, and I met a guy at a meeting in Saudi Arabia, of all places. I was there working on a job, and I was at an AA meeting there. And I was sharing my tale of woe in a meeting, and this guy got up in my face afterwards and said, "What step are you on?" I said, "Give me a break, man. I did the steps." And I walked away going, I hate that guy. And later I thought, yeah, he's definitely a jerk, but he seems a lot happier than you are. So I went back, and he ended up taking me through the steps of AA out of what we call the big book. And it totally changed my life. It radically changed my life for the better, this experience. In 3 weeks, my whole life changed. And I thought I would share some of that, of what we did that helped me, if that's cool. Is that all right, Bill?
Yeah, I'd love to, but let's set up the conversation a little bit. Maybe talk for a moment, because I've also heard the same thing, and you're indicating that such is true, that not that you needed to believe in God, not that anybody forced that on you, but that AA sort of works better, right? If there is a belief in a higher power, and you come into these 12 steps, come into AA with some sort of spirituality that you recognize there's a higher power. Maybe talk for a moment about what it is about AA that you can sense that that's the case, and how it's working, how well it works for those who don't have any belief versus those who do.
Yeah, well, so there's every kind of person in AA. There are atheists and agnostics. In fact, more than half the people that come into AA identify as atheist or agnostic when they get here. So you don't need to have it. There's no precondition that you have to have any belief when you arrive. And then there are people who grew up in a religious household who just kind of go along with, oh yeah, I believe in God, without thinking about it too much. And then there are very religious people, and then there are very spiritual people. The people who've really done the work, who've really worked the steps hard and are active in the program, I think I sort of poll them and interview them, like what's their concept of God. They say, well, I'm less sure of what it is and more sure that there is something. If that makes any sense to you, because in the end, what we're after through working the steps is a felt experience rather than an intellectual understanding. And so the belief sort of, there's a stage where that matters, but really getting to that place where you've had a felt experience is what will change your whole life, and that felt experience for me is so I worked the steps with this guy in order. I went through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and what arose from that was this feeling of being at ease, and it's kind of that same place where I had once felt emptiness here, that spiritual emptiness. I felt kind of a warm, glowing, loving feeling, and when I feel that, which I kind of feel now just telling you this story, I feel not only connected to whatever you want to call higher power, doesn't matter to me what you call it. I feel connected to that, but I also feel connected to you and to all people. I feel part of something much bigger than myself. And that's the feeling I was chasing in drugs, alcohol, and other things. That's that feeling of connection, of being part of something bigger than me. So that in the end is what we're after with the program. So it's pretty different than, than what I thought it was when I first arrived, and what I thought it was for those 20 years when I, was puzzled by the whole thing. What I was sharing with you before we went on, that I'm still an atheist for the God that I was an atheist, the idea of God that I was an atheist for before I did the steps. But what I was doing in holding that position was blocking myself from this different thing that has really made my life a whole lot better. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because I tell people all the time that I'm an atheist and a mystic, and I'm an atheist for the idea that there's, the bearded man out in the sky who's directing our affairs and allowing atrocious things to happen on one end, but helping people find their car keys on the other side. And so, but also
So
that
true.
there is this creative energy in the universe, and we are it, and we're all, connected in some way. Like I get on board with all of that. So now, having kind of laid that groundwork, take us back to this experience with this gentleman, and what these, what the 12 steps are, and why what he did with you maybe allowed you, even though you were doing these steps again, maybe to see them for the first time.
Yeah. It was right under my nose the whole time, and I just couldn't see it. Anyway, so, the first step is admitting you're powerless over alcohol, which I didn't have any trouble with that. So the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And what that means is that we have a lot of struggles in life to, unmanageability is not only the crazy things we do when we're drinking, but also struggling with depression, unhappiness, anxiety, anything we keep finding ourselves in as a result of sort of running our lives ourselves on like ego power, basically. And even though I had over 20 years sober, I had to admit that my life was still unmanageable. I couldn't seem to get out of this feeling of anxiety and unhappiness and emptiness that I was in. And so that's what I identify as an unmanageable life. And then step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And that's where I'd been stuck for 20 years, because I kind of wanted to intellectually understand what this power was up front. And he took me to a place in the big book that really helped me. I was always arguing about the God that you just described, an entity up in the sky controlling things from afar, which plenty of people believe in, and that's cool. Didn't work for me. So he took me to a place in the big book where it says about where to find God. It says, we found the great reality deep down within us. And in the last analysis, it's only there that God may be found. It's deep within every person. And I've been reading this book for over 20 years. I said, when did they put that in there? I never saw that, But,
and just to pause for a second, because I want to make sure that the listeners hear this, because you said it earlier, but I want to make sure that they connect the dots and don't miss out. When you say big book, you're not talking the Bible. You're talking about the Alcoholic Anonymous book,
the book Alcoholics
that
Anonymous.
Everyone in AA gets as they're going through the program.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's called, you guys refer to it as the big book.
But most people have it.
Yeah. And it's referred to as the big book.
Yeah, and that's reason, I know it sounds a little like the Bible, doesn't it? But the reason they printed it on this giant paper when they first printed it, and it was like this phone book size thing. And so it was actually a physically big book, which is why they called it that. But anyway, yeah, it said, so this line, we found the great reality deep down within us. And in the last analysis, it's only there that God may be found. It's deep within every man, woman, and child. And I just had a real experience with that concept when I heard it, like, oh, it's within, it's something within me. And then I sort of related it back to that time, that I just shared with you, where I heard a voice within me say, call AA. And I said, that counts as God? And the guy taking me through the steps said, yeah. I said, you mean I can pray to that and use that as a higher power? He said, yeah. And then he explained to me that the purpose of the steps is to unblock us from this thing that's already inside of us, that we get blocked from a felt connection with it by all the noise in our head, all our resentments and fears and selfish thoughts and things like that will keep us blocked, our dishonesty, things like that keep us blocked from this felt experience. And that like simplified the whole thing for me. It turned out the inventory isn't like where am I right, and where am I wrong, or where am I good and where am I evil. It is like what in me is blocking me from a felt connection with a higher power. And then the next thing that really helped me, so that like my life has been different from that moment forward when I stopped arguing about something out here and I started seeking within. I have felt better since that moment. Like it really did change my life, almost as much as like going from drinking to not drinking. Anyway, because I stopped this whole battle about God. If I can feel it, it's true to me. I can feel it, and that's that feeling of being connected to something bigger is what I need to. When I have that, I can get through any trouble that life throws my way. Anyway, the next part of the program is step 3, which is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Is what the step is, and which sounds very religious. And before I worked with this guy, I didn't, I just didn't really have any time for it. But although I did like God as we understood God, it sort of made it open. Like it was clear you didn't have to believe in a Christian God or a Hindu God or a Jewish God or any other. Like it's up to you to choose what you work with as a higher power. Anyway, but in the writing on step 3, there's a line that says, "So our troubles we think are basically of our own making." And the alcoholics and basically that we're creating our own trouble. Any trouble that I have in life, and I had a long list of them at this point. All these people who weren't behaving right in my eyes. My wife at the time, my boss, co-workers, politicians, all these people that I felt were making my life really difficult. And I could have passed a lie detector test that it was them doing it to me. But this line says, "So our troubles we think are basically of our own making, and they arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic's an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so." So I thought, at the time, I was like, nah, well, maybe for you people, but I got real problems, because this is saying I'm creating all my own misery. I just didn't believe it. But I'll tell you what, when I got through the next 2 steps 4 and 5, I realized, oh my gosh, I was doing it all to myself and I couldn't see it. It was all my own selfishness and self-centeredness, thinking things were more about me than they really were, that was creating all this trouble in my life. And now I want it to be me. I want it to be coming from me, because I know how to get out of it when it's me. And I haven't found anything. I haven't encountered anything in life since then where if I feel troubled, anxious, depressed, resentful, that it's not me doing it to myself. And that's actually a great piece of information. Although at first it hurts the ego to think, oh, I'm creating all my own trouble, when I've been blaming all these other people for all these years. But it actually is the key. I see it as the key to a happy life. If I can see how I'm creating my own misery and then learn how to get free of it, I can get through anything that life presents me. Anyway, then we go on to step 4, which is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, which sounds like, just to read that, you'd say, oh, where am I good and where am I evil? What are my sins and so forth? But so that starts out with resentments, like, who do I resent? That's the first thing that gets inventoried, because they say that resentment kills more alcoholics than anything else. Because the more resentful we are, the more blocked we are from that felt connection with something within us. And then once I'm in victim mode, once I'm thinking like a victim, oh man, they ruined my life, or they did this to me, and life would be so much better if that had never happened. It's very easy to justify a drink when I feel like a victim, you know. And so we inventory all our resentments. And then I'll tell you the next thing that helped me, doing those resentments. There's a line talking about the people we have resentments toward. It says, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So we try to see the person we have resentment toward not as an evil person who was just out to hurt us, but as a fellow sufferer, someone else just struggling through life, groping along, trying to make themselves feel good or feel better, and you look at them as confused people rather than evil people. And man, I'll tell you, because I had a lot of resentments when I did that. And when that really sank in, I thought, oh my God, like everybody struggles like I struggle. It's not just me, it's everybody. Everybody's groping along. I had heard a guy say, it's like we're all running through the woods at night, go bumping into things and but doing our best, you know. And so I don't know, I really softened to the world after that. I just felt like I got to cut people breaks. Life's really hard. And I realized, I've hurt a lot of people when I was drinking. I've hurt a lot of people sober. And I didn't go out with any malicious intent. I hurt my parents terribly when I was drinking. I didn't mean that. It was me just doing my thing. And then I realized like everybody's just doing their thing. They're trying to find a way to be happy. Anyway, so I don't know. I just became a very forgiving person after that. And I'm a big believer that forgiveness is 90% of it. Forgiveness of ourselves and others, in terms of getting to that place of a felt connection with a higher power, or God, or inner resource, or love within you, or your better self, or whatever you prefer to call it, your higher self.
Yeah. I'll just say here, I mean, I want you to continue on, but I'll just say here that being an atheist, and there are certain paths that have been attractive to me, secular Buddhism, for instance, and shadow work, which is the idea that when we're traumatized as children, which is inevitable, right? Just the birthing process alone, as babies coming into the world, we take on trauma and we can't escape it. And those traumas that happen, the times where we get hurt, times where we feel shame, times where somebody abuses us, inside our body, inside our minds, we create ways to protect ourselves going forward. And often it has us compromising ourselves so that we fit in with the world. But fitting in never felt right to me. And I carried a bunch of resentment for large portions of my life, even as people watched from the outside and saw things going great. And I never had a problem with alcohol or drugs. I drank a little bit, and I even to this day use some drugs as kind of conscious altering tools and stuff, but I've never felt an addiction. I've never felt like I was enslaved to any of those things. But the idea that I wasn't being my full self, and the resentment that I was feeling, like I can relate to a lot of the stuff that you're saying. And again, I've got no problem. I don't like the word God because it draws most of us to think of the bearded man in the sky idea, but some connectiveness in the universe that is all of us. Like, I think most of the folks that are listening to this podcast at least understand that idea, if they're not, buying into it. And so I don't think any of that's going to bump into anybody. This sounds like the spiritual path of human beings, which is to stretch ourselves for meaning, to stretch ourselves to see, why we're here and what happens after this life, to make sense of death. But the resentment part, I think, is a big deal in whether we feel good about ourselves or not.
I mean,
And yeah,
forgiveness is a big part of virtually every spiritual tradition, right?
yeah.
And to see people as fellow travelers, fellow sufferers.
Everybody is you under a different set of circumstances, right? Like, how could you
Exactly.
have made any
Yeah.
different decision than they did under their circumstance?
There's a beautiful Eckhart Tolle line that I love.
Love him, by the way.
Oh, he's the best.
Yeah.
To me, he's our best spiritual teacher alive today. But he's just so clear. For me, he speaks to me.
Yeah.
But he had a line, and he uses the pronoun, female pronouns in this, but it doesn't need to be. He said, if her past were your past, if her pain were your pain, if her level of consciousness were your level of consciousness, you would think and act as she does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then that just gets to, I'd be exactly like her. I may have a big resentment toward her, but I'd be exactly like her if I had to live her life and be where she is in a spiritual sense, right? And I think that just takes all judgment away. Like,
totally.
I would be do the same thing if I was there. Yeah.
And I'm deeply appreciative of this, the bit you're saying on forgiveness. As you point out, forgiving ourselves, like we couldn't have done any better than we did in that moment. So we need to grant ourselves some compassion and allow ourselves to move on without holding on to where we messed up. And then the idea of forgiving others, because just like that Eckhart Tolle quote, once you realize that you are everyone else under a different set of circumstances, then there is a lot more compassion for people for where they're at and for the decisions they make.
To me, that's love. That's real love.
Yeah.
I am that person, basically. Yeah. I like what you said. I am that person under a different set of circumstances. I may have to steal that line and use that. Yeah.
Please.
But so that really changed me a lot for the better. Also, suddenly all the resentments I had just fell away, and I just really got a feeling of that warm glow that I described. Feeling of being connected to all people. Let me just say something about that, if you don't mind, that I think has helped me a lot. You hear this in Buddhism and other traditions that we are all one. We're one with the universe, or we are all one, this idea of oneness. And I think that's a great way to look at the higher power thing. Is so if we're all one, if you and I are one, say, Bill, we're at the level of spirit, we're all one. If I hold a resentment against you, I'm really holding it against myself, because you're part of the one and I'm part of the one too. You know what I mean? And that what I'm basically doing by holding a resentment toward you is cutting myself out of the one, out of that sense of oneness. When I forgive you, I'm really forgiving myself in a spiritual sense, because I too am part of the one. And then I come back in and I feel that part of that oneness. And I think that's sort of an overarching theme for me. AA works on the fundamental backbone of AA is altruism, is doing service for others, helping other people without any expectation of anything in return in a material sense. So I spend a lot of my time helping new people, or people who are old people who are struggling, and I don't get paid for it. I don't want to get paid for it. Even if I got $5, it would ruin it, because it's that me giving of myself, I'm acting as if I am part of something much bigger than me. I'm acting as if we're all one. And when I act as if we're all one, I feel like I'm part of I feel like we're all one. I feel connected, part of something bigger. And that's the feeling, again, I was chasing in drugs, alcohol, and other things. It's the thing that, I think that the thing that we all have a thirst for. You touched on this already. I think it's a fundamental need of human beings, this spiritual thirst, this is a fundamental need to feel part of something bigger. And I think that's sort of where a lot of religion arises from, is it builds on that fundamental need that people have.
Yeah, and it draws my mind to the idea that when we busy ourselves about caring for the world around us, taking care of a herd animal, feeding the hungry, um, eh, eh, doing some sort of service for someone else, mowing the grass for the senior citizen across the street.
Yeah,
Anytime we're doing something for others, it seems like it really does benefit us. Like we have better well-being, and I think there's just something about when we kind of lose the focus of ourself and get out there and get busy making the world a better place, that in the idea that maybe there is no meaning, secular Buddhism points out that reducing suffering is a healthy goal. And I think when we're doing that, we kind of make our own meaning and we end up with feeling better about ourselves and in our inner world and outer world.
exactly right. Exactly right. You're kind of skipping ahead here because
Sorry.
what I'm getting
Let's go
to.
to, what is it? Step 5 we're on.
So step 4, there's more to it. So first you
Please.
inventory your resentments, and then you look at what they're doing to you. Then you look at, how did I actually harm that person that I have the resentment toward? What have I done? What have I done? Even, and usually if it's your wife or whatever, it's easy. You can see there's a lot of things. I mean, sometimes things happen to people as a child. If you were abused as a child, or it wasn't your fault at all. And people get very messed up by that childhood abuse and sexual abuse and things like that. A lot of people in AA have those issues. And there we say, if you're a kid, you don't have to even look like, where was I to blame? You were a child. You didn't know anything. But if you're still carrying the resentment 30, 40 years later and talking bad about the person, that's what you put down there. Well, I held a grudge for 40 years, and that's where I was wrong, and I'm willing to let go of it now. And then the next thing we do after, so we look at, and that's really where well, the big progress happens first in, like, looking at the other person as a fellow sufferer. Second, in looking, well, I'm not so great either, man. I've done a lot of things that harmed other people. And getting some humility and realize, it's very easy in our minds to blow up the actions of others and make them this terrible, evil person, and then justify the things we've done. So, I was just sitting there reading my Bible, and they came along and did all this stuff to me for no reason. And then you start to look a little closer, and you realize, yeah, I guess I did do that, and I acted selfishly there, and I did this to them. And then you start to realize, like, I played a much bigger part in this than I thought.
Yeah, I think the nature of humanity is that we're all bumping into each other, and there's no way exactly to reduce it to zero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that humility is actually really what we're after in AA, is to see ourselves accurately, because we get our own vision of ourselves is very distorted in our minds. And it's by writing these inventories down, sharing it with another person, that we gain some sense of humility of seeing ourselves accurately.
Mm.
And no better, and just as importantly, no worse than we really are. And then the next thing we inventory is fears. We write down all our fears, everything we're afraid of. And for some, I didn't think I really had any fear when I first started this inventory process. And by the time I was done, I realized, oh my gosh, fear has been running my life, and I couldn't see it. I had no idea. And so that really opened my eyes to, like, there is a lot going on inside of me that I have little awareness of. And then you look at dishonesty, secrets that we've kept, things we've stolen, lies I'm telling, either by commission or omission. And we get honest about that. And then harms done others, ways we've hurt other people, and then all of our secrets, most of which are usually of a sexual, nature, things we don't want people to know about us, and almost everybody has them. And that's it. We write all that down, and it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to think about doing that. Doing it is actually not that hard. people say it took me 4 months and 2 hours to do my fourth step. They thought about it for 4 months and were petrified, and then they sat down 2 hours before they were supposed to meet their sponsor, and they wrote it all out, and it wasn't so bad. And it doesn't take that long to do it. And then the next step is the fifth step, where you go share all that, everything you found typically with your AA sponsor or an AA mentor or someone you trust, who understands what we're doing here and why we're doing it.
Right. So that way they're not adding shame and essentially compounding the problem. Because much of these pieces we keep hidden, right, are based in shame, that we feel we're not acceptable to the world if everyone knew our deepest, darkest secrets. And being able to convey those to someone who won't judge you seems to set up a space where you can maybe finally your own self consciously hold all that.
Exactly, man. They won't judge you, and they won't judge the people that you're talking about either. They're going to help you try to find a place of love and forgiveness for yourself and for everyone in your life. If they're doing it right. Let me read you just a little quote from the big book about the fifth step. It says, we call these the fifth step promises. It says, we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Kind of beautiful writing. Mm-hmm. But I thought I liken that it differentiates a spiritual belief from a spiritual experience. It says we may have had spiritual beliefs. Now we begin to have a spiritual experience, which is again that felt thing, where you feel something, or you feel part of something bigger, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe, in his very poetic language there. But and that was true for me, especially when I let go of all my secrets that I was sure I would be judged for. I was, really scared to tell anybody. And when I did that, they were like, that's it? That's the whole thing, that you're afraid to tell anybody? And I've heard probably at least 50 fifth steps myself at this point.
Yeah.
And every time they're petrified. And every time I'm really like, that's the thing that you're afraid to tell somebody. Don't tell me you had an affair. It's so much bigger in our heads than it is in reality. And it's a beautiful experience. I recommend it for anybody. Don't carry a bunch of secrets around, because it just eat you alive.
Never been in AA, but in the role I served in my former religion, I had the chance to interact with people in a way where they came to kind of get things off their chest. And we had one gentleman was in his 80s and he had cancer and he was dying. And he said, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? And he then proceeded to tell me the story about how he thinks he murdered somebody when he was in his 20s. Bar fight, they went outside, and then he hit the guy so hard that he thought he killed him, and the guy wasn't breathing and stuff. And so he just took off and didn't remember, didn't know who it was, didn't have a name or anything. And he left the scene, and now we're 60 years later and it was eating away at him. And there wasn't anything I could do to resolve it, but just the ability to listen to him and not show judgment. His countenance, like how he acted, how he responded in those final days and weeks was much different than before he got that off his chest. And again, atrocious thing, and there should be justice and things like that too. But 60 years before, there's nothing I could do about it. But just not passing along the judgment was meaningful to him.
How did it feel for you that he was willing to share?
Such a heavy, I just realized, such a heavy thing to carry all your life. To think you took someone's life and not to be the kind of person who wants to take someone's life. to carry that around, I can't imagine the weight that was for 60 years.
To me, when people share these things with me, I never have a sense of judgment of them. All I ever really feel is love for the person.
Yeah.
You know, I feel closer to them, closer to higher power, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? And so it's a great thing, and that too really helps humble people in the best possible way to like get totally honest about yourself. Like, here I am, warts and all. And in the end, that's really the best we can possibly feel, is if we're presenting ourselves as accurately as we can. You know?
Yeah.
And so then so that was a great experience for me, and I learned so much about myself through that process, because telling it to someone else, you talking with them and the feedback they give you, and commonly the sponsor will share things about themselves, you know, that they have done, so you don't feel so alone in what you know your experience. And also you just get more clarity talking it out with somebody than you do when you're just writing it down. Anyway, then step 6 and 7 are becoming willing to let go of all, you know, well, it says have God remove, but let go of all these defects of character. So are you willing to forgive everybody in your life? Are you willing to do the things you're afraid of, even if you're afraid of them? Are you willing to do the right thing? You know, are you willing to be honest where you've been dishonest? Are you willing to try to be unselfish where you've been selfish, and so forth? That's really what steps 6 and 7 are about. And then steps 8 and 9. Step 8 is you make a list of all the people you harmed. So I did that. I wrote them all out, and I did it takes time to really, like a marriage, it's really hard to see that accurately. And I think I did kind of a half-assed amends in my marriage at the time. And I ended up getting divorced from that woman. Then the amends, I'll just jump into amends. Amends, you go to the person and you list the things that you've done that you remember that you feel bad about. And then you also give them an opportunity to tell you, you know, you ask, you know, have I harmed you in ways I haven't mentioned that you would like to talk about? Because I would really like to make things right with you. You're really out to mend your relationships to the best of your ability, at least on your side. The other person doesn't have to do anything at all. They don't have to apologize for anything they did. It's all about cleaning up your own side of the street. Anyway, with my wife at the time, we ended up getting divorced, but we, after a tough, you know, year or two, we became friends again. And every time I saw the marriage a little more clearly, I would call her up. We had 2 kids together, so you know, we had to deal with each other, and I would call her up and tell her, you know, I saw this a little more clearly, and I'm sorry for this and that. And then actually she ended up getting cancer. She was diagnosed with cancer in 2017, and then in 2018 went into hospice care. She died in summer of 2018. But in the end, I ended up being one of her primary caregivers at the very end, the last couple of months of her life, like carrying her to the bathroom and changing her diaper and feeding her. And that was the most amazing experience. I mean, this is probably the deepest spiritual experience of my life, was all that history between us. That was the most difficult relationship I ever had with anybody, you know. And all that past reasons that we had fought and not gotten along vanished. I couldn't have even told you what they were. And what was under that was this pure love. It was like love without attachment, you know. Because what could she give me? She's dying, you know. So it was just, and she felt it too. All the years of struggle were gone on both of our sides. And even though it was a horribly sad experience, you know, I wish she was still alive. it was also maybe the most profound experience of my life, because I realized that's probably under every relation, every person on earth. That God, that sort of God's love, or agape love, that love without attachment was lurking under that the whole time, and I felt like I'd been shown the truth with a capital T. That's what really is under everything, is this deep, deep love. And so that was, in the end, that was my amends to her, was to reach that place, and it couldn't have ended better than it did, given that she was sick and died. So that was my amends there, and I made a bunch of other amends, and I had stolen some Playboy magazines from a news agency when I was 13, and I went, I mean, there were a whole bunch of other ones, but I went back, 40 something years later and told him, walked in, I said, are you still the same owner that was 40 years ago? I said, well, that was my dad. I said, well, here's $100. I stole a couple Playboy magazines here when I was 13. I'm an old guy now. And he said, oh, you too, huh? He didn't want to take the money. I said, well, give it to someone else. And so, but that's what we do, is we just try to make things right wherever we can. And that also brings about a great feeling of spirit, of connectedness. It's a humbling experience to go tell someone you were wrong, and but it's also one of the most powerful things you can do. And you have to be very careful making amends, that you don't implicate them in any way, or criticize them, or bring up their faults, which may be glaring. You have to be very, very careful just to keep it all on your side. Like, here's what I did, and I'm so sorry. Or even if it's just being angry at the person for 30 years, you say, I'm so sorry, I've been angry for so long, and I don't want to be angry at you anymore. And
that's such a tough thing, because
yeah,
if we're, and again, I get it, because it's really about you letting go of the burden you're carrying. But there's so many moments in life where, say you hold a grudge and that's the thing you want to let go of. Meanwhile, the other person did some atrocious harm to you, and it's got to be an amazingly difficult thing to get to a place where you can stand face to face with somebody who's caused harm to you, and to only focus on the small part you played in that whole transaction.
Well, interestingly, Bill, those are the amends that help us the most.
Yeah.
Because it's actually, well, I'll tell you a little anecdote that a friend of mine tells that I think really captures it really well. This friend of mine, his dad left the family and ran off with his secretary, and left the family in turmoil. And he was so angry at him. And he drank at him, and he used drugs, and he blamed him for everything. He eventually got sober very young. He got sober as a teenager, but his dad came into the rehab where he was, and he was instructed to vent on his father and tell him all the things he was angry at him for. And he just unloaded on him in front of a whole group of people. And he said the resentment was still there. It didn't really help to unload on him like that. And then a couple months later, the father came into a session, and he apologized for everything. And my friend thought that was what he really needed, was to hear an apology. And then he could forgive and let it go. It didn't work. He was still angry about it. And then a year or two later, he was working the steps in AA, and he got to this. And he went and he made an amends to his dad for his behavior. And then his resentment toward his father was gone. That was the way to get free of it, was to own his part of it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't totally make intuitive sense unless you look at it from that spiritual model of, like, we're all one.
And it also feels like, sort of like, blame the victim, but I know that's not what it is. And I hope that people don't don't hear that, because I think it's easy to kind of feel that sort of message in it. But really, it is about giving permission for you to let go of whatever feelings you've carried because someone else did something unhealthy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's to how to no longer be a victim of that
Yeah.
person. This is the process to get free of victimhood, is to say, from this day forward, I am responsible for my own actions and my own feelings. I'm not going to give that power away to anybody else anymore.
Yeah.
And it's a scary step to take. I mean, a lot of us have felt like victims for most of our life, and I'm like, who will I be if I don't have this? What you'll be is happy, joyous, and free. That's how we really get free, is through this process. The path to freedom in AA is to forgive and let other people off the hook 100% for all their behavior. It's then to inventory yourself, make amends where you've done harm, and then forgive yourself. But put yourself on the hook 100% for your own side, even if what they did to you was much worse than what you ever did to them. You let what they did go. You own your side. You make amends for it, and then you're done with it. You don't beat yourself up anymore, and hopefully you don't beat them up anymore. Then you get free. Then you're not lugging that around anymore. There's a great Nelson Mandela quote. He said it when he left prison after 27 years in prison, unjustly imprisoned. He said, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness behind, this is the day he got out, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness behind, I'd still be in prison. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's really true,
Yeah.
And it's
Buddhism.
really, again, it's all about getting free for us. It's not about justice or anything like that. That's between that person and their higher power or their karma or whatever. It's for them to work out. It's not up to us.
Yeah. In Buddhism, there's the story that the Buddha goes outside of his palace and he's walking around amongst the midst of all the other people that are the citizens of the land, and he just notices all this suffering. He just notices, poor people starving and violence happening and all kinds of all the human bad behaviors and bad motives that are out there. And he just sits down, and they say he sits down underneath, I think it's the Bodhi tree is what it's called, and he just eventually, what he calls enlightenment is just sitting there long enough, holding awareness of all of that happens as part of the human experience, and just letting go of attachment to it. And as you're telling the story, forgiving the other person is letting go of that attachment of what they did to you, that's still tethered to you now, even though it happened, weeks or years or decades ago. And then letting go of your own things that you've done to others is also letting go of attachment, and really just recognizing that this is just the world we are in, that things are constantly unfolding right in front of us, and there's really not much we can do about it. There's very little, and to stay connected to it is only harming us, and finding a way to kind of untether ourselves from that attachment to all that is really a way to peace.
Well, in Eckhart Tolle terms, what the steps really do is help us get into the now. They help us get into the present moment, because all that process I just described to you is a way of letting go of the past. So the past doesn't control our current state anymore. Yeah. Because resentment is really, what resentment means is re-feeling something that happened in the past, And as long as we're doing that, we're stuck in the past, and so what it does is free us up to experience the present moment. And then letting go of fear, which is usually about the future, also brings us into the present moment. So we let go of the past, we let go of the future, which are really just stories in our mind anyway. And that leaves the present moment, which is the only thing that's real.
Yeah. I've got about a half hour left here of time. I know we've got a few steps to go into. I'll just say one more thing and I'll let you kind of pick up then. A saying that I've heard, I've used a lot of times, is that the past is just memories and the future never comes, and all we have is right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's how to live. Man. If you want to be happy, that's how you want to live, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The present moment's the only thing that's real, and it's the only place you can meet your spirit or higher power or better self, or you can't find that in the past or the future. You can only find it in the now. But
Mm.
yeah, so I made amends to people, and then step 10 is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So you're admitting that I'm a human, I'm going to keep making mistakes. When I do it, I've got to, own up to it, and keep inventorying myself, keep looking at where have I fallen back into resentment or fear or dishonesty or selfishness. And the way you can tell that you have is that your life turns to crap again. And it seems like everybody else is the problem once again. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I've just gone right back into self-centeredness, and I'm lost, and but I know how to get back, and that's to inventory myself, share it with another person, make amends if I've harmed anybody, and then get on with my day and get back to the present moment. And so I find that since I've done the work, I have spent, if you add it all up, a couple of weeks in self-created misery. But the rest, I feel pretty damn good, like 95% of the time living this way. And I really now see my alcoholism as a huge gift. Like, it's where I once thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me, I now see it as the best thing that ever happened to me, because it led me down this path that gave me a way of living that I wouldn't trade for anything. Anyway, the step 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, in quotes, as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And so you hear the expression God's will a lot in AA. I don't know if you hear it in the rest of the world. I'm so immersed in AA that I hear that. And I think that's a misunderstood. I'm sure you hear it. And where I hear it applied out in the world and in a religious sense is, somebody dies and they go, oh, well, it was all part of God's plan or God's will. And I really hate that. I don't like that. I don't look at the world like that at all. Things happen. People say everything happens for a reason, and I don't agree with that. But everything happens. You know what I mean? So I just need to accept that. Thinking that there's a reason behind it doesn't help me. I don't like looking at it that way. Why would God gave this little baby a terrible disease, terrible, painful disease? Oh, but everything happens for a reason. Well, I don't know. That doesn't comfort me at all. But babies do get horrible, painful diseases. And what can I do to make that better? How can I improve things for that baby and for their family? That's God's will, in my view. What good can I add? How can I improve matters? That's the way I choose to look at that phrase, God's will. And that's really what that's what the AA program is talking about when they use the phrase God's will.
Yeah. The only thing I would add there is, again, maybe going back to sort of Buddhism, but when you are present, when you're aware that you're aware, you have the most capacity to be your best, healthiest self, and to have your senses about you that you can sense what's going on with others around you, and to hence be the best effect for good in the world. And I think when we are present and aware that we're aware, we have the capacity to do a greater good. And that capacity, in my mind, is, again, if we are the universe, Eckhart Tolle, which I use in this podcast all the time, but you are the universe expressing yourself as a human for a little while. You are doing God's will when you're present and aware, and your mind and thoughts and feelings help you to operate better in the world than you would have if you were paying no attention or focused on the past and future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. So in this, we meditation and prayer. So, and then it's meditation. At the time they wrote the big book, the AA program came about in the 30s. I'll give you just a little AA history because we have a little time left. But so I was telling Britt, actually, the origin, one of the major tap roots of the AA program was an experience between Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, and a guy named Roland Hazard, who was a wealthy, drunken businessman from Rhode Island, whose family was very embarrassed and worried for him, sent him off to Dr. Jung in Zurich, Switzerland, to work with him for a year. And Jung, met him however often, and discussed his alcoholism and all. And Roland left, and within a few days he was drunk again, and he came back. He said, "What's wrong with me?" And Dr. Jung said, "I thought I could help you, but you're a hopeless alcoholic. There's nothing that psychiatrists can do for you. I don't do what you need done. What you need," he said, "is to have a vital spiritual experience," is what Dr. Jung told Roland. And I don't know how to bring that about. So do your best to try to have one of those. I can't really help you beyond that. So he planted the idea that the solution to alcoholism, that alcoholism was really a spiritual problem above and beyond everything. And his belief, Dr. Jung's, was that what alcoholics were really thirsting for God, that their thirst for alcohol was really a thirst for a connection with a higher power, that what we've been talking about, a spiritual connection, that's what they were really missing, but they were mistaking alcohol. And alcohol, hey man, the nice warm glow a few drinks gives you is awfully similar to the feeling that I've described of being, connected to a higher power, so it's very easy to make that mistake. Anyway, Roland went back and he joined something at the time, and this is in the early 30s, something called the Oxford Group, which was a first century Christian fellowship founded by a minister named Frank Buckman. And that Oxford Group is where most of the AA steps came from. They had confession, they had inventory, confession, restitution, and helping others, and prayer and meditation, all part of it. And Roland then joined this, and he was able to stay free of alcohol, and he made it his lot of his life efforts were helping other alcoholics find this thing. And he helped a guy named Ebby Thatcher, who ended up helping Bill Wilson, who is the co-founder of AA. So it was a direct lineage from Dr. Jung's, that meeting in Dr. Jung's office, to Ebby Thatcher helping Bill Wilson, who then, he is the primary author of the big book and co-founder of AA. Bill Wilson had an spiritual awakening as a result of working the Oxford Group program, and was trying to help other alcoholics, and he ended up stuck in Akron, Ohio in a hotel where he was about to drink. He had 6 months sober. He hadn't managed to get anybody else sober, except he kept himself sober through these efforts at helping people. And he ended up calling every church in the church directory, saying, my name's Bill Wilson, I'm a rum hound from New York, and I'm looking for an alcoholic I can help. And everybody was hanging up on him. And finally he got this guy who said, I know somebody who needs help. And he ended up connecting him with a physician in Akron called Dr. Robert Smith, who we call Dr. Bob. And he ended up helping Dr. Bob, and the date of Dr. Bob's last drink is the founding date of AA, which is June 10th, 1935. And from then it's grown from those two guys to there's over 2 million people in AA today. So, so they kept it going through that. And so anyway, it was a really long way to get back.
I love all this because,
yeah.
The question we started off with in terms of titling the episode is Alcoholic Anonymous. Is it a religion or a spiritual path? And as I'm just listening to you list these 12 steps, I mean, whether you're having an issue with substance abuse or alcohol abuse and you find yourself in the program, or whether you take these same applicable ideas and just use them in your own life with no reason in terms of alcohol or substance abuse, you can just see how helpful this kind of process would be. These 12 steps would be helpful to essentially anyone.
To
And
anyone. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And it is like a religion or a spiritual path. I mean, you've got this, the narrative of Carl Jung and Hazard, and that provides sort of a myth story, giving you kind of the background for how you get to where you do. And you really do have all those components. You've got the spirituality, you've got prayer or meditation, you've got a higher power, you've got community, you know, reliance on each other.
Community.
Yeah.
And except one difference, nobody's trying to get rich. In fact, they made
no tithing.
They go out of their way to stay poor. AA does, because they thought money would corrupt it.
Yeah.
So AA just barely gets by on a shoestring, and they intentionally set it up that way because they knew that money would ruin it.
Yeah.
Interesting. But
the other thing that seems obvious that religion can't stay away from is you're not applying in a definitive meaning for everyone about what that outer source is. And religion, where it sort of gets off track, is claiming to know absolute answers for everyone. And the reality is that every human being's having their own unique experience inside. And every person needs to have space to sort of interpret those experiences individually. And so you see kind of in ancient cultures, there's this idea of having a shaman. But in modern world, you know, every time a religion is created, whoever either made up or had a spiritual experience decided that should be the way that everyone defined their spiritual experiences. And I think one of the things that AA seems to do is to give people their own room to interpret that differently based on their own understanding and life experience.
It's the beauty of it. And there's zero dogma. You know, there's zero things you have to believe. And again, if there was, I would have died a long time ago, because I wouldn't have stayed. If anybody was telling me what to do or what to believe, I never would have come. I wouldn't have done it. You know? And they understood people like me, thankfully. You know, and they let me. And I had my own journey. I mean, my story is a little odd in that I wrestled at the realm of materialism for over 20 years before I went down the spiritual path. But it gave me the latitude to do that. Nobody judged me, or maybe they did, but I didn't sense it, you know. And I mean, a lot of people do the steps in their first 3 months sober. I didn't really do it until long after that. Although I count all that experience as valuable. Finding out all those things that didn't work was just as important as finding out what did work, because you need to have the contrast, you know. But yeah, so the Oxford group way of praying and of meditating, they believed once you had made an inventory, shared it all with another person, and made all of your amends, you would have an open channel to God, you know, as they called it. They were pretty Christian, you know. They were very Christian, the Oxford group was. Anyway, that then in meditation you would receive your marching instructions basically from a higher power. So they actually meditated with a pen and paper, and they wrote stuff down as the thought came to them, what they should do about this or that situation. They wrote it down, and then they spoke to another person about it to make sure it wasn't all, you know, crazy self-willed. And then they went out and did it. Where my meditation practice is not that, although I've tried that, and it has been helpful to me at times to meditate on a question, you know, to say, like, what should I do about my divorce, my wife? What should I do about this situation? And then write everything that comes down and see if anything you weren't thinking of comes up, which it does sometimes, you know. But mainly I meditate. I use transcendental meditation, which I find very helpful. And I also pray, and I pray in the sense, not that I love, there's a line, you guys are so smart, you've probably heard of it, but it's a line from Kierkegaard that he says, the purpose of prayer is not to influence God, but to change the nature of the one who prays. So we're not trying to get God to do something for us. We're trying to get ourselves to act in a good way all day. We're trying. It's basically like self-coaching or self, programming ourselves to try to be unselfish and loving and helpful and understanding of people and forgiving of people, etc. And I find that very helpful. And really, I'm just praying to this thing within me, I guess. I find it helpful.
Yeah. I would only add, when we're doing that, meditating or praying, we're slowing things down. We're kind of helping ourselves to be a little more still. Our mind maybe is not as full of all the day-to-day, minute-to-minute things that we've got to get done. And so you can kind of open up maybe a space or a capacity where something in us, you can even just make it yourself. It's your higher self. The healthiest parts of you can kind of speak, and you can hear it and maybe get some, even if it's coming from you, some instruction on how to show up in that moment, or to, when the
Yeah,
meditation or prayer is over, to show up that you wouldn't
exactly.
have had if you were busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a key part of keep staying awake, spiritually awake, is
Yeah.
meditating. Absolutely, I agree with that. And then finally, step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Mm.
So there it makes it clear that the purpose of the steps is to awaken our spirit, basically, and that you're almost better off not having a concept of God to start with. You know what I mean? They talk about that in the beginning, and you can believe whatever you want. You can choose your own higher power, but that no concept of God actually works beautifully. In fact, that helps you. That opens your mind to it being something much bigger or different. If you have an idea of what God is, like I think God is this, it's going to almost necessarily be limiting. You know what I mean? It'll be something too small, that won't give. What it turned out to be is something so much bigger and so much different than the God I was rejecting for all those years. You know what I mean?
God breaks out of the box that you put him in.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so having a concept of God sort of necessarily puts God in a box, whatever God, I keep using that word, sorry about that,
No,
but
no, no. Yeah.
you all know what I mean, I think, at this point. And yeah, I use the word now because it's just the word that people use in AA. And I know what I mean when I say it. And it's kind of cool that way because I know what I mean when I say it, but if there are 30 people in the room, there might be 30 different views of what that word means. But it kind of means the same thing. It kind of means the same thing to everybody, even if they would put it in different words. You know what I mean? And so it's a place we can sort of meet, even though we would all define the word differently. Yeah, it may provide the same comfort to people, no matter how they define it. So anyway, having had that definitely happened to me. I had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, and then I was instructed by my sponsor, the guy back in Saudi Arabia, that I should then carry the message. I should go back in meetings and share about what had happened to me, share my experience working the steps and how much better I felt. And so I did that. I went back to meetings in the US. I was living in upstate New York at the time. I started sharing. I worked with this guy. I feel so much better. Blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, all these guys wanted me to help them. Before that, nobody wanted me to help them. I was a mess, and I was getting a new. I was getting a new. I was getting a new sponsee every week, a new guy to help, and I would just sit there and how do you help an alcoholic? What do you do as a sponsor? Well, you read that big book together and make sure they understand it, because it was written in 1939. The language is a little old. You help them have a personal experience with the writing. You slow it down. You ask them, what do you think of this? You turn lines into questions, and then you give them the directions on how to do an inventory. You hear their fifth step, and then you watch them change. You watch them have an experience. That happened. It's happened to me many times now, but the first time it happened to me, I was working with a guy whose father, he had had a resentment toward his father for 40 or 50 years, blamed him for everything, every bad thing that had ever happened. And I just watched him melt. I watched all that hatred of all those years melt away. And it was on that line I shared with you, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. He just was able to see his father as a person and not an evil force, just another guy, another fellow sufferer. And he just melted in front of me. And he went on to make an amends to his dad, and I think his father's died, passed on now, but they had a very beautiful, close relationship from that time forward, which, I mean, to me, that's what it's all about. That's what will heal the world, if we can have more experiences like that. So yeah, so I've really devoted myself to helping other people since that time, and I now do a 12-step workshop online on Zoom, which I gave Britt the flyer for it. I start one tonight, actually, in 2.5 hours. I'll be starting it on step 1. And I've done this workshop now 75 or 80 times, where we go through the steps as a group. And I did them all in person until the pandemic started. I didn't even know what Zoom was prior to the pandemic, but then started doing them on Zoom, and we would get 200 or 300 people at a time, all going through the steps together. I wrote a little guide, that sort of simplifies and clarifies what to do and why at each step. And I gave that to Britt as well, so you guys have a copy of that. And that's been a real joy, helping other people like that. And
yeah, I don't have the flyer in front of me, and she wasn't planning to be with us this week, but she was going to try at the last minute, tried to make it work. And
yeah,
I'll get that information from her, so folks may not be able to do it tonight, but I certainly want to put people in contact with you. So first off, I've loved the conversation. I think it's helpful to anybody out there that's listening who has a alcohol or substance abuse problem. It's going to be helpful, I think, just because it was a spiritual conversation, and our audience here values these kinds of communications kind of going on between people, and understanding that there is sort of, they have a hard time separate, because most of this audience, I'm stammering right now, but most of this audience comes from a very unhealthy religion, and they've deconstructed it, and they're looking for tools and conversation that helps them to figure out what life really is, or how they can be a better person. And this conversation is going to be deeply helpful to that. If folks want to reach out to you, we'll find the flyer, we'll get the other information you sent her. I'll put it in the show notes, but can you maybe just, if somebody wants to reach out to you?
Email me right now if you want. It's smithstrat@gmail.com. It's SMITHSTRAT.
Yep.
@gmail.com. I also have a website that's called a designforliving.net.
I'm just looking these up, and I put the email into the comments.
Great.
Designforliving.net.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say, to add on here, and I love this podcast. I've listened to a bunch of your episodes, and there's a couple of things I was thinking. One is, coming out of a religion has some parallels to coming out of alcoholism. It does, because you've had something that worked for you at one time, right?
Yeah.
And then it stopped working.
Yeah.
And that's really I'd still be drinking if it was working.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
But it stopped working. And I beat my head against the wall and I tried to find ways to make it work. And I imagine you didn't just one day have a bad feeling and then leave the next day.
No, it was a decade of bumping into things that didn't add up.
Exactly. And so that's my experience. The whole thing of falling into nihilism and meaninglessness, that's the experience of almost every alcoholic. And then finding in the end that you still had this spiritual thirst that needed to be quenched somehow, right? And then being on this same journey that we're all on, really. And so I really thought I've listened to a lot of your stuff, and I thought, oh, there's a lot of parallels there, and I imagine a lot of your people have tried materialism, money, fame, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, trying to, a new house, new job, whatever, going back to school, trying all those things, and found them, fine in themselves, not the thing that they really have that thirst for, the spiritual connection. And then the one other thing is I'm worried that, and I'm sure that it's true. You know how I shared with you that my first exposure with to AA was in that detox and I got to the word God and I was like, I'm not doing that. And I went and drank for another 7 months. That I easily could have died at that time. I mean, I got really sick. I could have easily, and I'm just sure that there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of atheists and agnostics out there who struggle with drugs or alcohol or other things, who are like, the program wouldn't be for me because I don't believe in God. And I see why you think that. From afar, you read those steps and you think, oh, this is a God thing. I'm not doing that. It turned out to be so different from what my mind, interpreted it to be from the very little exposure I had to it. I was very quick to jump to say, oh, no, this is a religious thing and I'm not religious, so it's not going to work for me. And what it turned out to be is something so very different than what my mind jumped to. And so I just hope and pray that people will hear this and say, well, maybe I should give it a shot. Maybe it's not the thing that I thought that it was, because I know so many of my atheist and agnostic brothers and sisters are out there struggling, thinking there's nothing there for them. When to this atheist, it turned out to be, pretty much the best thing that ever happened to me. So, and it has given me I told you we would come back to this. It's giving me a real sense of meaning and purpose in my life that I didn't have before that. So,
as we kind of wrap up, I'm just deeply appreciative of your time today. And I didn't know where the conversation would go because Britt had arranged for this interview. And I'm just really appreciative to have sat down and talked to you. You're framing this in this entity or system, Alcoholic Anonymous, but it really is just a spiritual walk, and it's a way to let go of the burden that all humans are carrying, as we don't show up the healthiest, or as people don't show up the healthiest in our space. And
so
just deeply appreciative of it.
Yeah, there are actually over 150 12-step programs now. There's narcotics, and smokers.
My old church has one.
There you go.
Yeah, they stole the AA program and put their own little spin on it, and they do it too. So.
Oh, did they? That's cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I wondered if you could even do a 12-step program for coming out of a religion too. I mean, I wonder kind of.
There's certainly a lot of things that, I needed to extend some forgiveness for, even as the system or people in it were still being very unhealthy towards me.
Every one of them was doing their best. Every one of them was doing the thing that they felt was right, and that they probably thought was the loving thing to do for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Maybe not. It wasn't that motivation, but
even if ego gets in the way, they were doing the best they could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're all groping around trying to find what works too, right?
Yeah. I
But,
will. I'll
yeah.
include the big book because you sent her the PDF, and I could find a copy online while we were talking in the beginning. I'll leave your contact info. We'll put people in touch with the information from the flyer, and if there's folks out there who that AA would be a benefit for, I hope that you'll take the time to look into it. And for everyone else, I hope you really deeply enjoyed the conversation, because I very much did, Tori, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Bill. Sure appreciate it. Have a great
Yeah.
night. Oh, actually,
Yeah.
and the workshop that starts tonight, anybody can come. You don't have to be an alcoholic. You don't have to be an AA member. We have plenty of other people who've done it and have benefited from it. So thanks so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Enjoy your
Yeah.
day, everybody. And Tori, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah.
This has been another Almost Awakened episode. Check us out at almostawakened.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation to keep this podcast running, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources shared in today's episode. For coaching opportunities or extra support, visit nononsensespirituality.com to meet with Certified Spiritual Director Brittany Hartley.